guess seeing people who look like me do it, it was just something that kind of, I don't know, it just felt like I needed to do it in a way.
Yeah.
I'm happy it's worked out the way that it did because in many ways, I definitely wouldn't say it's an accident.
My guest today, the voice you just heard, is a Chicago-born, New York-based photographer who came into this craft the long way around. Many of us do. He studied economics and picked up a camera only because he couldn't find anyone who could execute what he is seeing in his head. The frustration, through his frustration, it became his practice, and his practice has traveled him through many, many places, from Red Hook Labs to Saatchi. And now he recently has shot covers with Keke Palmer, A$AP Rocky, Venus Williams. He calls his work historical renaissance, world building. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest, the talented Justin French. Justin, brother, welcome.
Thank you, Justin. Good to meet you. I like your name.
Good to meet you. I like your name too, man. Anybody that has that name, I'm like, they're gifted. They're talented. Justin is a rare bunch, I say.
Bunch. A
Yes.
really good bunch.
Yes. So, Justin, let's start off in the early stages. So you're self-taught photographer and director whose work has moved from a Chicago upbringing to exhibitions, working with all these movie stars and famous people. For someone hearing that combination for the first time, what's the short version of how you got there? Or is there a short version of how you got there?
Say, it almost feels kind of like an impossible dream, but I think that for the most part, it was a very sort of natural, organic process that I kind of went through. It wasn't intentional. I started taking images just because I happened to buy a camera in general. Like when we mentioned the aspect of being frustrated with photographers who, it wasn't so much that they couldn't take the images. It was more so the cost-wise. You know, it was me just sort of this like young editor at the time, like reaching out to photographers with ideas that I didn't even know how to achieve, but I was kind of wanting them to be able to do it almost for me, or not necessarily for me, but like as art director, but with no real sort of like back catalog to my name.
Yeah.
And so that was really the frustration, was like the cost that they would charge me to sort of freelance this thing for me would be, you know, upwards of like 8 and 10K. Just for their time. Production is just not necessarily an easy thing to do. It just costs a lot of money to get everyone involved. And so that's kind of how I started like taking pictures. Because it was just like, I've got to learn something to at least be useful in the capacity that I was like editing for. So that's kind of how I started it. And then I had a lot of friends. So it just really kind of stimulated me and motivated me and kind of encouraged me to keep learning. Because I didn't really know anything about what I would consider to be like professional image making at the time.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. How did the analytical background shape the way you think about image making today? Because you studied economics at the university. You spent roughly 7 years working through corporate and data analysis before you fully leaned into photography. So is there any connection between that with that analytical background?
I think so. It's not the same, but I would say like, I feel like the distance sounds much further than it actually is, in the sense that like my initial dream in economics was like working for like agricultural economic policy, ideally. But I ended up working in marketing. And so that was like a lot of software as a service and like proprietary data modeling. So it essentially required me to like build out audiences for different brands and how to target different audiences. And it was essentially like building blueprints to help brands like reach their desired audience. And so from there, in a very similar way, it was about suggesting creative, you know, be it like topics or sort of aspects of marketing that would reach a particular audience, things they would be interested in, things they would want to see, the places they'd want to see these things. So like, it's really about targeting the audience, targeting their interests, finding the mediums in which you'll reach them. And in many ways today, in hindsight, I can sort of look back and say, I'm still doing the same like prescriptive research that I do sort of in image making. If a client needs to reach a particular audience, I'd research sort of whatever patterns they've had in the past in terms of like creative collateral, looking at what they're trying to do, look at whatever the initiative of the campaign is, look at who they want to shoot or who they'd like me to bring them a suggestion to shoot. And so it's almost like that same kind of like marketing muscle that's still being flexed in a way. So for
Mhm.
me, it is, I certainly enjoy this a lot more.
Mhm.
It, it does have its parallels, but it's not necessarily like a one-to-one same, but there are ways I still feel like I'm doing.
Got it. Got it. Now, this is the $1,000,000 question. When did it click that it was photography was for you? Like, was it a specific shoot? Were you just tired of the rat race? What was it that clicked for you? And you're like, yeah, this is it. I'm going to move with this.
Honestly, like it really wasn't like a self-initiated click. I knew I loved taking portraits because it was just fun. It was emotional. There was a reward at the end of it, the sense of seeing, the subjects respond to their images. But I never really, I would say I respected the craft of photography enough to know that I would never be one at
Ooh.
the time. I knew it took a lot and I knew I didn't have any of that sort of educational, foundational,
Hmm.
those tenets that are necessary, to
Yeah.
make images. But in terms of like it being something that I just dreamed of making a living off of, it was not that.
Wow.
I very much was a person who stuck to my day job.
Hmm.
And I just shot when I was free. In many ways, it felt like I was almost like renting space in
Hmm.
the art world,
Yeah.
knowing that I had to like run back to the desk at some point, but like it was very much that. But I knew I enjoyed it for sure.
Hmm.
I knew I liked it. I respected it and, aspired to get better at it.
Now, why portraiture? Why portraiture? Because for me, when I first got into it, being from California, being from LA, I love street photography. I felt like that was just like beautiful. But looking at your portraits that you shoot, I feel like you are very intentional. You're very focused. You have a very clean story and line and set for your person. So why did you choose portraiture over all the thousand different types of photography genres?
Also did start street. I was street too, but it was like street was the easiest thing I could do. Not easy in the sense that I was so great at it, but like it was the most accessible. Portraiture was the next, like, I think portraiture was when I knew I needed to up my skills. Street was natural light. Street was dependent upon what the city's vibe was. Was it overcast? Was it sunny? Was it fashion week? Was there something interesting? Portraiture, I think, is when I really said, okay, I've got this thing. I've been hired a couple times to do, fashion week backstage. Portraiture was me, sort of closing the setting into almost like clinical setting so that I could
Okay.
direct natural light from my window, Bronx
Hmm.
apartment. Yeah, it was me taking the time and sitting with people, making sure that they knew I was not a professional, but I
Hmm.
was here to like sort of step by step work with them through to get to where we both needed to be. In many cases, it was like friends who were singers or dancer. It were people who were aspiring to do things and
Hmm.
people who needed collateral
Hmm.
image that they couldn't afford to go to bigger
Professionals.
photographers. So
Yeah.
I really lucked out in the sense that they needed the imagery.
Hmm.
And we were all really good friends. And so it was almost like word of mouth. It was
Hmm.
just like, oh, Justin can take your portrait. And so we would just, it was me and everybody.
Wow.
There were people who were more established that were like agreeing to sit with me. And I was
Mm.
just like, oh, wow, like this. There was a sense of, I don't want to call it like power, but a sense of respect that people had, even though I was novice and
Yeah.
learning, that they were still like, you know what, I see what you're trying to do. I trust this and like, let's do it. So I
Wow.
just got a lot of practice that way. Just spent summer doing portraits. Like it was every day more people would come do
Wow.
portraits. And I had a work from home job, so it just didn't really interfere.
That's perfect. That is perfect, brother. I'm telling you. Now, you did share some kind of simple little DIY things you said using natural light from your own studio. So what did those little DIY beginnings teach you about, photography and directing? Because mastering natural light is something I used to teach my students. If you can master the sun, a studio is easy. If you can understand where to shoot and how to shoot with the sun that you can't change, you can't adjust the kelvins on it. Hey, you're gonna be good. So what did that DIY beginning teach you about directing and photography?
why the concept alone is such a potentially like rewarding process, because I think for me it kind of allowed me to develop at my own pace, just like simple optimizations of like rotating this or bringing in a mirror. At the time, there was no V flats for me or reflectors. It was just me. At best, it was like an Amazon kit that I got that had a few lights. And so it was just that and like as many mirrors as I could grab to like, just classically like bounce light, and so it also allowed for a lot of experimentation. When you're doing it yourself, like the cost is so low, could be low, but it allows you to experiment and try and figure out where it is that you need to strengthen your capacity. And for me, like being able to work in that capacity, I had just allowed myself to be honest with what I wanted to do in an intimate setting. And, it really just allowed me to like really experiment with people, build trust, experiment with them. It's my ideas, it's their ideas, it's our ideas. And just sort of think, I don't know what art school would have brought me, but I do know that in many ways, that was my like self academy of just like practice.
Yeah.
It was at my own pace. There were no stakes. I didn't feel like I had to succeed. I
Yeah.
was comfortable enough to be able to fail and not necessarily be burned by it.
Right.
So I think the DIY was quite crucial for me in terms of having no training and sort of practicing enough to feel confident enough to kind of carry through.
Right. Now, this is something I know, we probably all know very well that, photography is in some aspects very much gate kept. There's a lot of gatekeepers in some aspects of photography. So, what did being on this path force you to build in yourself that being a self-taught professional photographer going through art school might not have taught you?
I think this is kind of one of those areas that I just never really, having attended a formal art school, I never really, again, like had the gumption to reach out further than what was before me,
I see.
so I never even knew to aspire to like these greater opportunities than what I was doing, because what I was doing was already just servicing my own public, and again, I really respected the artistic practice that I just didn't expect to be where I am today. So for the most part, I was able to learn the dynamics of the industry really from a safe place,
Mm.
because anything that ever came was something that already felt
Organic.
so natural.
Yeah.
So now I could definitely say I've had cold water like thrown on me for
Yeah.
sure. But I think I'm so comfortable and confident in what it is that I want to say that it hasn't really deterred me. It's kind of, I feel like, honestly, like my academic journey in econometrics and like all of that economic training wasn't art in itself. So I like to liken that academic experience as still somewhat of my art school, in the sense that I'm still being confronted with like difficulties. At least in school, it's like you're being confronted with like concepts and theories,
Right.
that
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
be deconstructed and like hypothesized and tested empirically. I see
Yeah.
that almost in similar way, not similar, but like I've applied that same sort of framework to this,
Got you. Yes.
there's a difficulty. Maybe you need this, this, and this in order to attract the attention of this particular client, So for me, I knew there were things I needed to learn. Obviously, like port came quite naturally to me. But as you were saying, like if you could do natural light, you could do studio. That wasn't the case for me. Like studio was really difficult because I'm accustomed to working alone. And now like one of my first like actual like gigs was a Vogue job, which was like a one pager. And I thought I would just go to set, myself. And no, like they quickly were like, no, that's, this is a shoot. So we need your team. We need, who are your lighting team? Who is your set
Goodness.
designer? And this is stuff I had no experience with.
You
So
just have a backpack. You're like lighting, setting. Everybody's in this backpack right here.
I was so ready, and like I had to really like cobble together a team quickly to figure out, how we're going to do this. And so, yeah, I think, yes, there is that. I think we may be looking at it almost from a defeatist point of view, in the sense that the images that I were making were not as they almost, now it's like second nature today. So even when I was doing it then, I'm looking at my images and I'm looking at what is public, what is I guess behind the gates that are kept. And it's like they were not the same at all. So in my mind, it was just kind of like, oh, well, I don't even have to worry because I'm doing something totally different anyway. And then I ended up
Okay.
meeting a few like agents and like art directors, and they were like, no, that's not how this works. They were like, what you're doing becomes a norm, so you keep this path forward, you don't alter what you're trying to do in order to attract the attention that you think you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't alter what you're doing in order to reach. You keep doing what it is that you're doing because what you're doing becomes the new norm.
Got it. Yeah.
And so that was kind of the training that I had. And I had really good people around me for sure. Like I had some of the
That's a
best
blessing, man.
advice. Yeah. So I've always been taught to sort of stay me.
Mm.
And at some point it will come around that, what I provide is a need at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. So through my research, I found this one quote you said. You said you drank in fashion, art, and photography by living in London and New York. What did those two cities give to you? What did it pour into you as a beginning photographer and someone advancing in this state?
In London, I was like a teenager, sort of outside of my norm, which is
Mhm.
like America. And by that point, like being outside my norm almost was normal because I had already moved to like Las Vegas, middle school, just almost like this, like, well, like,
It's a different place.
yeah, like up until London, I had only really known like Midwest and West Coast, so I'd moved to Las Vegas during middle school. Chicago was a place that I kind of considered to have a really rich and complex history. Like Las Vegas in my mind was young, it was
Yeah.
like production. I think the entire West Coast, in my mind, it just kind of like feels like I'm on stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like this almost like Shangri-La economy. But yeah, like it felt like this kind of like almost like utopia for adults and children and like everything that was in between. So it's like if you want Paris, it's there. If you want the south of France, it's there. Like it's all Vegas just sort of brings it all to. And I think it was just like a really revealing existence for me because as a youth, I'm in school with the children of like the showgirls, the poker table dealers, like all of the like
Wow.
showmen and show people of Vegas. I'm like in school with their children. And for
Yeah.
me, it was just kind of like, wow, my mom's just an accountant, but like your mom does this and your father does that. And it was just like,
Yeah.
it was a very, really interesting, like, I guess almost fourth wall breaking. So that was really interesting. But then you start getting to like London and New York, and it's just, it's like culture on, I don't even want to say steroids, but it's like, it's in places that are far older than places that I was. So it's just cemented culture, new culture, fusion, migration, out of migration, a lot of just smashing of
Mhm.
all these different things all at once. And like, I don't know, it's very interesting. I really hated London initially, just could not really deal with the lack of excess was
Mhm.
accustomed to, specifically from Vegas. I think there you just get everything available to you. And I realized that like Europe and like continental Europe, it's experience and like things are not necessarily in massive excess. And so that was mainly my
Mm.
pain point initially, just not getting what I wanted. And then eventually, like some months later, I had a really bad flu and I just felt
Mhm.
like death was near, basically. And I woke up, I could smell again. It was spring, flowers were
Yeah.
blossoming. And I was just like, wait, London is really beautiful. Like, there's a lot of people here. It's a very warm social culture. Definitely things I still don't like, but for the most part, the good outweigh the bad. And I was meeting a lot of people,
Mhm.
learning a lot. Me, obviously, I'm in economics at the time, but I'm still surrounded by designers and models and
Mm.
actors
Yeah.
and poets and theater. I was starting to go to theater regularly
Mhm.
just because it was in pretty much every neighborhood. You could go see plays and like, yeah, it just had access to so much culture that was just brimming. And it was, even if I weren't necessarily engaged in it myself from a like creator capacity. I've always been quite, I guess the word would be like social. So even
Mhm.
as a result, like I'm digging in deeper with people, just discussing their day to day, practicing their
Mhm.
respective arts. And like, we're friends. So I'm seeing it from a production standpoint as well. And it's like that kind of
Yeah.
like Vegas seeing things behind the scenes. It's just, it's kind of stuck with me ever since, where it's like, I'm not simply a consumer. I'm usually somewhere seeing the makings of things with people. And so I always get to see it
Mhm.
from like a really honest point of view. And so it was just a very
Mm.
inspiring number of years that I spent there while studying. And like, yeah, it's just really opened up a lot. There was
Mm.
access to travel. Everything was so cheap. We had
Mhm.
EasyJet, Ryanair, even the coach buses.
Yeah.
You could just go £3, £6. You
Yeah.
know, you go to Italy and like stay in a hostel for,
You're back
yeah,
before
it's
you
like
know.
big
Yeah.
hostels are bigger than my apartment, 12 euros a night. And like, we just really enjoyed it, so it just
That's
exposed me
dope.
to a lot of culture, things I can appreciate now as an artist. At the time, it was just me, just like bouncing around and really appreciating it.
Just exploring.
Like, I learned to appreciate
Yeah.
life really early on. And so for me, everything was just always like a cat, just seeing everything with new eyes for the first time and really trying to like
Right.
take in as much of it as I can and see where it shapes me, basically.
Yeah. It's like the practice of being present. Just, hey, I'm here. I'm going to take this all in. Let's see what happens. So let's touch a little bit on your evolution. So Red Hook Labs in 2017 was your first major show. But by 2022, you were exhibiting in the new Black Vanguard at Saatchi Fotografiska. What changed in you, not just in your work, but between those rooms?
Distance. I would say the Red Hook Labs was the actual very start of everything for me. Like, that was my beginning, was that gallery. Nothing really happened before it. And so by then, once the like traveling exhibition started, I honestly, well, definitely a lot changed in me. By that point, it went from me just sort of bouncing around from maybe this job to maybe that job. I think by the time that exhibition started, I was already fully working, and it was just like, we had a well-oiled team, had, a team that was based in Europe, well, Paris, London, New York. I had already sort of ironed everything out. And so it was like full working capacity by then, but it was also
Mhm.
quite busy. And so I never really had an opportunity to actually reflect on what was happening. I knew about it, but it was just like from the initial, hey, do you want to be a part of this? Even went to the launch. It was in New
Okay.
York, but I had no clue that it was doing what it was doing the entire time until someone like, one of our friends was just like, "Yeah, like you're in the Serpentine," and I was like, "What?" He's just like, "Yeah, like I saw your work here," and I was just like, "Oh yeah, 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 I'm a part of the Vanguard," and they was just like, "Yeah, but it's like," and I looked and I'm like, "It's in all of these places." I was just like, "Wow," like
Right.
it happened while I had
Yeah.
no real understanding of where it was going and like how big it had
Right.
gotten and how requested it had become.
Right.
Really, I'm glad I didn't, because I feel like being able to look at it after was just like, oh my God, like this is really beautiful. I was really proud of
Mhm.
them. I think Antwaun did like a phenomenal job. Like, I don't know if it was his anticipation that it would be that big, but it was really
Yeah.
like a beautiful thing. Looking back, very like grateful, just because it provided a opportunity for many of us to be in spaces that probably will not come again. I should be hopeful.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, that kind of a tour is quite massive.
Yeah. Now, let's touch on this. You spoke on it. The new Black Vanguard. You spoke on that. That puts you in conversations with specific generations of Black image makers. What did being in that company clarify for you about your own work?
In hindsight, it's quite affirming, primarily because was in similar space with some people I really admire, who I think are sort of like brilliant creators, world builders, each respective world builders in their own right. I think,
Yeah.
some of the worlds that we build are quite different, but it
Yeah.
feels great. At the time, again, it's just kind of like, I feel like in this kind of work, because there is not necessarily a strong residual for anything that you do, you're always just focused on the next
Yeah.
check, basically.
Bag or, yeah. Yeah. The next bag.
So yeah, I think looking back, it's just like, wow, like I'm next to Cambolati. that is, you know.
That's crazy. And for you to be so modest about it, you're like, wow, I'm next to him. I would have been like, who
Right.
do you know who that is right there? Do you know who that is? Tell one of your friends, hey, take a
Right.
picture, but don't make
And
it
it's
obvious.
really
Don't make it
funny because
obvious.
it's like we're really close friends, but it's also like
Yeah.
there are times that actually,
You hold them in a
yeah,
certain esteem
like
because you know
there are
and you've
times I have
seen
to
their work.
really like step outside of like the friendship, which is almost like sibling and cousin, like, you know, arguing and
Yeah.
like enjoying and going to eat and fighting. But it's
Yeah.
also like, wow, like you're really brilliant. You know, you really are
Yeah.
a
Yeah. 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 Totally.
foundational creative mind that, you know, will inspire many to come. I aspire to be that way at some point.
That's dope, man. Now, let's touch on a little bit of your own personal philosophies that you are bringing into your own work and things you're starting to show. So, in your own bio, you talk about historical renaissance and world building. What world are you building, and who lives in it, and who is it for?
Sure. That what I mean by that is actually like historical resonance in the sense that the things that have inspired me image wise, probably much more historical, but they still resonate today. And so my goal is to try to make images that sort of still have a bridge work between what would be like classical portraiture with obviously like a modern sensibility in the sense that, you know, we're working on people of today. So it's really trying to figure out ways to sort of bring that together would be my goal. In the mythos, I think the mythology aspect, you know, sometimes it is quite literal, but then sometimes it's like new mythos or mythos that I've created or
Got you.
sort of like
Yeah.
allegory that I'm riddling to myself in the development of the story. Often we're building characters, you know, especially when it comes to
Hmm.
editorials. So like it would take maybe the Acne papers or some of the re-edition. We're playing with these almost like, you know, they are mythological sort of like tropes in the sense of potentially like a trickster or a savior or the Spartan or
Yeah.
the, you know, the hero. So like using those sort of
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
just sort of use it to tweak the image in a way that if you're looking at it properly, it's almost humorous, although it's quite serious. So it's just like playing with these small little like tropes to help influence or like subvert the image a bit. And so that's kind of where I aspire to be. I think in the
Hmm.
context of working for clients, it's not necessarily always the place for that. So the goal is to find ways to fuse some of that in. It's definitely easier on
Mm.
self-initiated projects and editorial things just because that is you lending yourself to it. But then obviously on like commercial
Yeah.
things, it's like you really have to make sure that these are in alignment with the subjects. And in most cases, it's celebrity now. So I'm a little more careful about infusing too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Now let me ask you this, as I'm curious about your take on like how mainstream but photography has created that bridge. For example, how I believe it was the Source or Double XL, they did the Gordon Parks photo shoot on the bricks in New York or in Philly, where they took all the rappers and put them on that and then you have Kendrick Lamar using Gordon Parks references in his music video
Hmm.
DNA, where he has the ladybug on the nose, the ladies praying. So my thought is this: is there space enough for creatives like yourself and creators like in hip hop to pull these genres from the past to make them relevant for today? Do you think there's space for that? Or do you think it needs to, or the history needs to be the history and we just need to
I
know
think it's
about it?
all in the way it's done. Definitely feel that it is completely fine to obviously research and reference history, but I think what makes it clever and what makes it unique and what makes it what I would consider to be a continuum more so than replication would be really finding ways to have conversation with that without it being just simply a direct replica. But I don't have any sort of like conflict with the idea of people pulling from history. I think it's important. I'm pretty sure that like most of the greats have been influenced by at
Somebody.
some point, and I
Yeah.
mean that even going back to Renaissance painting area. I think
Hmm.
it's important. I think it's also something that if we look at it this way, right? And then also look at, say, music now. It only takes like maybe 2 or 3 generations for what previous generations would consider to be like a great work to be almost forgotten by a new generation who is not in touch
Right.
with it. What I look at today, even in music, which is just like truly like sampling is on steroids. It can seem
Yeah.
insane, but then when I'm looking at discourse, I'm like, oh wow, like they've never had any sort of touch point with these references. And so
Got it.
if that is
Yeah.
one way to get people to drink water, then maybe, you know, let's just do it.
There's no harm, no foul. Yeah. No, I totally get it. I totally get it. I was just curious about that because you were speaking so much about like the mythos and creating that bridge. And I'm noticing now how we have artists who are being very intentional with that practice of I think it was Kendrick Lamar's DNA one, where he literally took like those stills and put them into a music video, and everybody, I mean, if you're a photographer, you understood it, right? You got it. You were like, oh yeah, I know what this is. But then you have people that were kind of
Genius.
like,
No, I'm sorry.
what is this? He's a G. Yeah, like they were like, I'd never seen this. This is crazy. But I was looking at it like, that's Gordon Parks. I was like, wait, Gordon Parks is still alive shooting music videos? I was like, hold
Correct.
on. So I went and
But I
checked it
do
out.
think there's really a significant art when you can reference and it actually fits exactly, when it fits
Yes.
perfectly and makes all the right sense contextually. I think that's when it's really best. I think,
Yeah.
and this is not about any music artist, but I think what ends up becoming difficult, at least from an image making perspective, is when the references actually don't relate to what's being done. And I think that's where the research is really paramount. I think, yeah, it's, even in just
Yeah.
like fashion stories, I feel, this is just my opinion, we're quite away from the idea of the story relating to itself. That makes sense. And now it's kind of been traded in for just like cool, 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 as opposed to, I mean, even in my case, like we're not really building a day to night story in a fashion story. It's just kind of like, all right, this looks good, that looks good, that looks good, that looks good. I do think that is
Got it.
something I would like to do more of, but it's just,
Yeah.
budgets and stuff have really started to become slightly tighter. And so you really have to I think this is the period where we're really going to have to squeeze out genius to make things make more sense,
Yeah.
for sure.
Now, looking at your work, I just see some of these timeless pieces that you're creating and working on. So how do you balance timeless imagery with contemporary relevance? Like images that feel like they could exist 100 years ago, but they're clearly being focused and shot in right now in this present time. So how do you balance that?
I think it's kind of like, it's probably like the age old debate of like art versus commerce, in the sense that for me as an artist, my goal is to provide as much sort of like research as I can into making something quite thoughtful and something that is timeless is the goal. The speed in which things need to be done can obviously oppose against that desire. But I think the balance that I've come to realize is that this is not necessarily really fight in that sense. The only thing I can really do is put all of my
Gotcha.
tools and experience in working and knowing how to work into to do and want to do the best I can. Even if I'm being fought to do it, it is a battle, but we try to make sure that we are at least providing really considerate lighting and setting the conditions such that we get the results that we want, despite whatever I don't want to say like despite whatever the intention is, but like the idea is that no matter how fast you need this, we still want to make sure that we use all of our like technological know-how on set as a team to make
Yeah.
sure that like we're building something that's really
We hit
beautiful
that.
and not
Yes.
something that's like tried or quick and cheap and like fully relying on retouch. The goal is to really
Yeah.
get a phenomenal image direct, as opposed, and that
Mhm.
way we at least know what we've got and whatever retouch we need to do, it's just extra fluff, but it's not something that's
Right.
dependent on it. So it's, it's a big battle, but it's like, I think I'm experienced enough to know how to at least get the image I want. And my goal,
Mhm.
I can't really say it's timeless. It really is up to the viewer. And so
Got you.
that's where the real battle is making sure that the viewer recognizes what you want
Sees
them
it.
to see.
Yeah.
Because once it's in public, like it's no longer your image, and whatever intent you had it's just gone.
Yeah. You can't be like, hey guys, this is what I was trying to do.
Only in museum, I think you can do that. In this particular like arena, it's once the public has it, it's what they say it is, you know?
Yeah. There's no return from that. Now, another point I want to touch on, which I've noticed in your work, is identity and representation. So, how do you approach photographing underrepresented identities without just reducing them to a symbol?
Let's say like having an actual relationship plays a major part in like being able to achieve this. I think for those who are simply photographing underrepresented people for symbolism's sake, it will really show. Out of me, portraiture is built on trust. Most of the people that I've shot probably already previously built a close working relationship with them. We speak, we drink together, we eat together, you know, so we already are quite comfortable. And so I would say, yeah, you really have to be respectful. I think as a photographer, you're already in this really unique position where you should be trusted. And I think
Mhm.
it's important to honor that, making sure that you are respectful of people, making sure that they're not uncomfortable, making sure that once that image is done, they don't feel used and feel as though they've been appropriated in any way. So I think
Right.
for me, what's always been, my like safety zone is that I'm working with people I know, I'm working with people I love, I'm working with people
Mhm.
that love me back, you know, and so if
That's
you
dope.
don't know who it is that you're working with, as a photographer, it really is your job to take the time before shooting to really figure out how you can expose yourself the way you're asking them to expose themselves. If you're not sort of in that
Yeah.
kind of like symbiotic exchange, you know, I can't ask you to be
Yeah.
vulnerable in front of me without me giving you something too. You
Sharing a
know, you have
piece.
to
Yeah.
feel that you can trust me.
Right. Right. Now, what responsibility do you feel when your work reflects marginalized communities, particularly the Black and LGBTQ community?
It's honestly one of the highest responsibilities. I don't do it lightly or do it for any other reason than it is my community. You know, I'm grateful to be a part of these loving communities and to be an instrument in the act of like posterity and showing how they live, love, and shape
Mm.
culture and counterculture and you know, just sort of these are communities that literally shape humanity, whether they know it or not, in the sense that a lot of the kind of like dialogue and sort of things that we end up receiving via social media, sayings or perspectives, are things that have already been sort of mulled over and potentially decade or
Mhm.
decades before it ever even reached mainstream lips. And so it's
Right.
a really high order. It's one I deeply respect and I'm very grateful to even be able to be a part of. I think
Mm.
it is, yeah, it's also not necessarily like the most rewarding in the sense of how the public typically receives it, but I think it's some of the most important work in terms of,
Yeah.
just providing a record that real humans were here,
Mhm.
beautiful humans. So I think it's one of the
Mhm.
most important things.
So, what does dignity in portrait
Mm,
mean to you? I was noticing that, and I've looked that up throughout your work. So, what does dignity mean in a portrait to you?
I think dignity means like a lot of things, but most paramount, it means that like for the subject of the image, again, like, do they feel comfortable to the extent of
Mhm.
like regret or like, you know, do they hate that they've done it? I think portraiture, as I know and love it, is not fast. It is like an intimate verbal exchange between the two of us, you know, which typically like discussing honestly something so far away from what we're doing at the actual time. And it really requires that. And so I think
Yeah.
we're kind of like negotiating this like risk associated with being vulnerable. And so
Right.
as much as the subject is like allowing me to view them, I really have to let them truly see me too. And to me, this is like the
Mm.
real science behind portraiture. And so the
Mhm.
dignity aspect of it is really down to the comfort of those who are sitting for the portrait. You know, it's like you can only really get an honest portrait when someone has been honest with you in the sit. So I think the
Right.
dignity really probably applies to how many varying degrees of emotion you can see in a single portrait.
Mhm.
Most of us typically think of a face as only really telling one emotion in a particular still, but it's like, to me, the real dignity in portraiture is like this person felt really comfortable doing this enough to show you that it's not just a smile, or maybe it's not just a glare.
Right, right,
There
right.
are layers to this portrait, that you can actually come back and look
Mhm.
at later. Yeah, I think that would be my kind of like distinction between like dignity in portrait.
Nice. So let's touch a little bit on the craft aspect of it, the process, those types of things. When you're working, and I mean, listen, you've worked with many a name, big names, Keke Palmer, ASAP, Venus, people who have been photographed thousands of times. How do you direct a subject past the version of themselves they've already performed before in 1,000 other cameras?
From the start, it really requires like a thorough research, past what you've seen them to be. I think specifically, like you have to look, especially if they're really popular. Um, it's really about looking at all the current headlines, current life occurrences. Have they recently had children? Are they married? Are they, I don't know, losing weight or like trying to approach a new sort of venture in their career? So it's a lot of those things, and you really research them and figure out exactly like what's the body type like? What would be the strongest sort of circumstance to have them in? Do they seen as stronger? Do they want to be seen as more gentle? It's like finding those things and then trying to prescribe sort of a next step forward. I think for me, my goal is to try and not do them as they have been done before, but like do them in a new,
Mhm.
powerful, strong. I love the lighting that I do because the goal is to have that kind of like Spartanic austerity where they just look so strong and so powerful and so regal and so varied and so emotionally intelligent that it's like, there's no anger, there's no just like joy for no reason. It's sort of a layered
Yeah.
emotion. So I try to make them look as strong and like dignified as possible. Most don't
Mhm.
disagree with that as a concept. And so that makes it a little bit easier. If the goal is like if the
That's
goal is to
perfect.
make everyone look quite strong and layered and varied and powerful and clear. But yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
really just trying not to impose simply who I want them to be, but I try to figure out, who I envision that they might inspire to be. And it is a dialogue, many will let you know, well, that's not me, and so
Yeah.
which I can't take as like an insult. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, now I know. So once you're given, there's a dialogue on who they'd like to be or what they'd like to achieve in an image, it makes it quite easier for me to then go back and revise and find something that actually works. So it's a lot of art direction, which is not very easy, but it is
Hmm.
something I think photographers should really focus on. Yeah.
Hone in on. Yeah. Now, when you first get a project, what comes first? Is it the subject, the setting, or concept?
It depends. Sometimes you just may not have all three. Sometimes you may only have one. So yeah, recently I would say the subject is usually first, more recently, because most already have someone in mind who they want. And so from there, it's like, okay, this is the subject. What do we know about them? What do we know about what they don't like? What do we think we know? And so you then start building the setting, will they not want to be outside? We had a shoot recently with National Geographic where it's a major celebrity. I wanted to be in public, but I didn't realize that this particular person was like so massive that like it just would have been complete pandemonium.
It wouldn't have
And
worked.
so it
Yeah.
destroyed the entire concept that I initially had. And you just have to pivot and make it work. But the best, I think, are projects that are concept first, in which case you already know the concept that you'd like. So it's just like populating the other two in that and finding who works within the concept. So I think that's my favorite style to do. But a lot of times it is
Mhm.
just subject first.
Now let's talk a little bit about, some of these pivots in life we have to do as a creator and as a creative. So Something I'm curious is what have you stopped trying to prove in your own personal work?
I haven't. I think the major thing I've been trying to prove is that I can please myself. And it's just one of those things that I'm brutal on myself, maybe to a detriment, but I have to be. I think that kind of pressure is appropriate when you're really trying to produce something that you would like to consider a diamond. I don't think it's ever really been a scenario where I was like seeking to please any outer body. I think I am my toughest critic. I will ask opinions for sure. But that's really just, I don't know, additional consideration to see if any of that sort of verges with what my opinion is typically.
Got you. Okay. Now, well, I'm curious about this now. With the photo shoots you've done and you've taken and set up and created, how do you maintain your voice across all these pieces? You've done commercial, you've done fine art. I mean, especially in the commercial space, how do you maintain your voice and make sure that it's still visible?
I think for me, it feels bizarre that there is a consistent voice because for the most part, I'm trying to achieve different things in it, if that makes sense. So for me, it's quite different. But then probably to a viewer, it's like, no, I know how you frame, and situate a subject. But for me, it's like, I'm trying new lighting, I'm trying new set design, I'm trying new something. So for me, it probably
Yeah,
is just something natural. I think it's almost just like, the cadence of our voices. Maybe that is just that kind of recurring theme that kind of follows through. But it's not something that I've ever fought to maintain. I think I'm just trying to, again, I'm not really a art student. So for me, much of what I've done has been practicing in public and learning in public, which is terrifying, but I've gotten over that hump, I think. And so now I'm like
mm,
finally like knowing exactly what I'm doing and knowing exactly how to achieve what I want to achieve.
mhm.
And so yeah.
Okay, so I think that was a great segue into this question because through my research, you've talked about emotional security being the biggest challenge for emerging photographers. Where did yours come from? Even though you're your biggest critic, you did admit that, but I still feel like like you just said, like you're very comfortable and confident in what you're doing. So where did your emotional security come from?
Combination, like upbringing. I think my mother's always been like a very like involved and like rotating pillar in the like upkeep of my emotional self. I can recall, she may not, but I can even recall like as a child, like, kids just cry when they want something or like are upset. I just always remember her like wanting me to actually like vocalize what the issue was instead of just like flailing around and like being a baby. It was just like, wait, can you actually put
Yeah,
words to what you're feeling? And I think that kind of practice has always been something I've tried to keep like at the forefront of how I engage. It's like
gotcha.
confronting how I feel. And in
Mhm.
this kind of work, it is very, very easy to start to feel destabilized when you're looking at so much other work coming out, so much other really big opportunities that maybe you're not getting. It can be extremely
Mhm.
destabilizing. But I think a lot of that sort of like insecurity comes from when you feel like you don't have a place. And I think it is
Right.
extremely important to be very confident in your vision, be very sure about what you want to create. Because if you're not sure and you see something else, you could easily be influenced to start changing what it is that you want to do. And that may not be the best. What
Yeah.
I'm great at, and someone else may not be. But if they start to try to attempt to do what it is that I'm doing, they may not
Mhm.
be as skilled at doing that particular thing the way I do it and vice versa.
Yeah.
I can't be Avedon or Pin. I can obviously do
Yeah.
the best I can to sort of honor some of the pillars of like what they've established in terms of like lighting and structure, but
Yeah. What they
I
created.
can't be
Yeah.
that. So I have to sort of stay strong in that, stay strong in my vision and trust that
Mhm.
maybe, in this particular year, I may not be the strongest, but then their
Mhm.
boomerang will come back around and like what I'm doing will still have relevance and value somewhere. I
Right.
think if this is your only meal provider, it's
Mhm.
art. I don't think a lot of people like for me to say this, but it doesn't necessarily owe you anything in return. I think as artists,
Right.
if you're going to create, you're going to create whether it provides something for you or
Yeah.
not.
Or not.
So if
Yep.
you choose no longer to provide the art, that's a choice too. So I think, you've got to be secure because it will break you
Yeah.
if you're not.
Yeah, that's in every aspect of art and creativity. You have to, because another thing I tell people is not everybody's going to like your work. Not everybody's going to sit here and pat you on the back. You have to be okay with pissing somebody off, offending someone. And these people might just be a contrarian. That's their whole life. They look to just, for lack of better
Yeah.
words, talk shit. So it's just like you have to be okay
Which
with
can
that.
also be
So
helpful. And it's like, it's not even just art, that is also finding its way into everyone's work life who are not artists.
yeah,
If you're not secure and confident and able to like provide the functions of the job, it's like that is actually just life in general, so you've got to
yeah.
be very strong, and to get out your ideas and survive. I don't think I'd like to like think of like, I think it was like Michelangelo that did not want to paint the Sistine Chapel. It's the thing that really like
Right.
catapulted him into our like daily remembrance. But it's like apparently he hated it, and that wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't
You're like, you hated this. All right. If that's what you hate, I would love to see what you love. So yes. So Justin, as we are coming to close, I'd like to input this little section in. This is my rapid fire section where I just ask you questions and you give your best answer. So there some are to stump and some are to make you think. So let's see where your head is. All right. So here's the first one. Film or digital if you had to do one for the rest of your life.
but
I told you.
it's not even practical. No, okay, digital. I can do what I want with it. Yeah.
Digital. Okay. All right. Here we go. One word that describes great portraiture.
Transcendent.
Ooh, nice. Let's see. Favorite portrait you've taken so thus far?
I couldn't. I really couldn't. No.
I see.
There's so many
Yeah.
memories attached to each of them. They're all very. I couldn't. No. I'm sorry. This.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. I told you some of these are to stump you and some of these can be easy, man. All right. One visual cliche in fashion photography that instantly takes you out of an image.
I could think of a lot, but I reject that theory just because it's unfair to do. I think as a true image maker, like if you that one cliche in the right setting could be the one thing that like subverts that image to greatness. So I try not to. I can't.
Look at it like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay, which is a harder craft, winning a subject's trust on set or executing the image perfectly in camera?
trust. You can get the perfect image in the first 3 frames, but it doesn't mean you have the trust. So trust is harder.
Now, you've operated across fine art, editorial, commercial, and fashion. What does moving across all these creative spaces teach you about what photography actually is to its core?
It is a labor. It is, yeah, it's a labor. I think when you are approaching it in general, obviously there's like this level of like meticulous preparation. I think if you're doing it for yourself, obviously you can just experiment freely. But I think once you start crossing over into like the editorial and commercial, which for today's purposes, we can almost consider those synonymous or like homogenous to each
Yeah.
other, you really start to learn that you are a laborer. As much as you are an artist, you are
Mhm.
also servicing it, so
Mhm.
you start to learn how to, yeah, it becomes a labor. You start to learn exactly what it is that you need to do, how to infuse what you would like into it, how to communicate the things you'd like to infuse into it. Because even, excuse me, if something isn't necessarily heading the direction that you want,
Mhm.
your capacity to communicate and translate your ideas become paramount because they can also be the very thing that convinces a client of your point of view.
Now, this one, I'm interested to hear your outtake. So, what does it feel like to put an image of another person into the world that will live beyond both of you?
It's one of the most gratifying feelings. It feels amazing, especially when they also appreciate the image. I think one of the worst feelings
That's dope.
is you've done something that they don't like and it's
Yeah.
everywhere. I think that's probably one of the worst
Yeah.
feelings. But no, it feels great. There's like the one thing I quote, which I like put on my IG, it's like this mini pretend like quote, and it's like the reasons for my life are in a million faces. And that's kind of how I feel in regards to
Mm.
that. Like I it feels really good to do something and someone
That's
sees
fire.
this as a really beautiful and accurate depiction of themselves.
So let's talk a little bit of the last few questions are going to lean towards your legacy and advice. So for someone 5 years behind you on this creative path of becoming a photographer, what is the one thing you would tell them that nobody told you?
I would say, honestly, my motivations were so different from what I would think someone who's aspiring photographer would be. But any advice that I would give them would be look to your community, keep them very close, respect them, and utilize what you actually have access to because no one else has access to what you have access to. Think when I speak to many, they're really concerned with what kind of camera you're using or what kind of lens. These are actually things that are kind of important, but also not really. Nothing is more
They're
important
tools.
than
Yeah.
the artistry that you have in front of you, which is the people that you have. You know people who I simply don't have access to just by virtue of us being in different locations and being different people. There are people I have access to that no one else has access to. And it's like, you really have to start telling visually the stories that are around you because that is probably what's most unique to you that no one else can touch. And it's the one thing that's actually going to make you unique. I can't be David Sims and I can't be these things because
All
they
these
already
people,
exist.
yeah.
They already have a really strong infrastructure. They can go and knock an editorial out in 1 hour, that well-oiled of a machine. So I could spend years trying to reproduce that magic, right? Or I could actually just focus on something that actually suits me better. That would be the advice,
So when someone sees a portrait you made 20 years from now, they walk into a gallery, you're showing off your work. What do you ultimately hope they feel? And what do you hope they carry with them, along with them after that moment?
Be a sense of pride and possibility. I think I'd like to try to execute some sense of prowess in the images so that I think the goal that I always had was like, okay, if I'm making images, I don't want these images to only exist in one sort of point of view. I want if I'm making an image for maybe my elder family to be able to like find some cue within this image that also connects them to it. That's always been my goal, is never for it to be so like out of field that people can't connect to it. So I think that would be my goal, is for people to at least be able to look at it, reflect at it, and have a sense of wanting to see it again would be the most that I could ask for.
Now, last question. What would you tell young Justin, looking at where you've come from, the journey life has taken you, what would you tell your younger self?
I would have told myself to be even more aggressively like staunch in my vision. I think I've done well, but I think I would even tell myself to like really just like trust myself. I've really yet to be wrong. I know it sounds insane, but what I mean is in relation to myself. My gut has never really ever been wrong. There have been some things that my head has been wrong about, but my gut has always been right.
Yeah.
That would be my advice.
That's dope. Well, you guys, thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. My name is Justin Robinson. I have the other talented, gifted, this man. You guys look him up, support him, follow him on this journey of what he's creating. The talented, gifted Justin French. And this is the Art School Graduate Podcast.
Thank
We'll catch
you.
y'all
Thank
later. Peace.